And welcome back to the show. Brand new year. We're starting out strong. We're talking about bad habits for new players in Commander. I'm Levi.
I'm Jacoby.
And I'm Joe.
And this is the Thought Vessel. Welcome to the show. New year, everyone. How are we doing?
Woo!
Doing the pretty good. I've started doing video editing for other people at the start of this new year.
That's fun.
Yeah, we in fact took an entire week off because the holidays were that intense.
I believe it.
Yeah. I can imagine that for a lot of different companies and businesses, the holidays are terrible, terrible time.
Truthfully, it draws out some of the worst pet peeves that I have. One of them being the entire thing that I had to deal with during the holiday season being in IT, where everybody was trying to do their last minute, oh, I have this new internet provider because they apparently got some kind of deal. And somebody dropped on us 25 stores that they wanted in the span of 2 days.
Why? Why are you like this?
That's not happening. That's the magical crystal land. I think they can get that done.
It is the pet peeve of, well, I didn't think about it, so it's your problem because I only pay you pennies. No, that's not how this works. You signed a contract with us.
What do you think the normal amount of stores you could accomplish in that amount of time on a random week in August?
Specifically, it's because we can distribute that between like so many different people that trying to get that within maybe 3 days, perfectly fine. Because you could spread that across the multiple people within my department, including myself. What this guy didn't understand is that he is not our only customer. And that we've had other people before him ask for these kinds of dates.
This is the service that never ends. It just goes on and on, my friends.
Yeah, it definitely can be baddening when someone thinks, oh, yeah, you have nothing going on. Go ahead and do this.
Every time. This is why we have expedite fees for our customers, so that if they say, hey, I want this done today and not within your time frame that you said, which is part of our service level agreement, crazy how that works, we have an upcharge saying, if you really want this done today, pay us money.
Money does fix a lot of speed problems for people.
Absolutely. What about y'all's? Any pet peeves over the holidays?
I think mine, obviously, we renting a car, doing a lot of extra driving, kind of visiting family and stuff around the holidays. I think my biggest pet peeve is one when I'm driving and you always get that person who's trying to be hyper efficient. And like when you're turning left and they're needing to turn right and they like start turning as you're going. So like if you deviate from your turn or stop at all, they would hit you. Like that stuff is just unnecessarily stressful to do. And I don't understand how efficiently they think they're going to make their lives by like just starting to turn while someone else is turning. You're going to end up hitting somebody at some point. And it drives me nuts every time.
I hate that. That was, man, Discord cutting off that audio. If our audience didn't know, we've in fact moved from recording in person to Discord.
We're trying something new because life is hard and things are going on.
And I think we're just always trying to find ways to improve the show and improve what we're doing. So might offer some different avenues, and we're always open to different suggestions and trying to make this the best possible product for you that we can.
No, we're just ups. I don't know what you're talking about.
Everything we do is scuffed, but I promise it's not scuffed by intention. It is scuffed by intent.
2/3 of us are trying the best they can to make the best product for you that we can.
I'm going to take y'all down with me.
I was going to say, I'm trying, so I don't know who you're referring to because Joe does stuff. You do stuff, but you're definitely
He literally just referred to himself as a fuck up. I don't know what you're talking about.
No. We take the scuff.
Oy. Which, hey, what's scuffed in your life, Jacoby?
We're just focusing on the pet peeves today.
So, there I was, 4.5 months ago, scheduling my paid time off. I specifically tell these people 6 months in advance, hey guys, you are going to know right now, in July, I cannot be at the store between December 21st and January 3rd. Do everything they ask. I schedule the PTO. It turns out you can't select Christmas Eve and Christmas. Okay, I know we're not online on Christmas. That's fine. But Christmas Eve, apparently, our store's open. These people know I am not in town. They know I'm gone. I'm out of state. And what happens on Christmas Eve? Ding! You have been scheduled for a shift. I told you, like, you can see the days before and after. I am not there.
Pardon me, Jacoby. I believe we need you in for a shift on Christmas Eve.
Yeah, I had to, like, 2 days before I have to leave, I had to, like, go and, like, someone take this. I am not going to be here. If it is not taken by someone else, that is y'all's problem, because I told you guys months ago.
That also just seems like very bad on the system on that part to not be able to just ask for Christmas Eve off.
But just, like, when you request something so far in advance, there's just zero justification to not give it. Like, hey, Joe, in like 7 months, can I borrow $1? If you can't prep for me borrowing $1 when you agree to it, 7 months from now, we have problems.
Okay. Counterpoint. Tell me 2 months from then. Because then it is recent enough.
Keep reminding. Maybe they forgot about it. If you tell me something 7 months out, I'm probably gonna forget about it. I'm not gonna lie to you.
Sure, if I didn't remind them 2 weeks beforehand, 1 month beforehand, literally 2 months. I gave them reminders all the way up until the day I said goodbye.
Jacoby, why aren't you reminding them the day of?
I did. I literally, December 20th. Hey guys, see you in a few weeks. Oh, you're going to be gone, Jacoby? You know this. I said this. What do you mean?
Sounds like they need more coffee and donuts. That's what they need.
Truthfully, I've had that issue on the opposite end because I have been scheduling so many people for different things and I haven't been always writing it down. So whenever they say that, they just remind me saying, hey, I'm not going to be here. And I just go, okay, cool, and move on to the next person. But I've started a system to write down everybody's dates because I can't see them because I'm not their manager. I'm just the person who gathers up the chucklefucks and says, go forth, do the work.
Go forth, my cavalcade of cups. Do a thing.
My goodness. But pet peeves does lead us into our Am I the Arch Enemy? Joe, take it away.
EDH. Am I the arch enemy? Hello there, Hive Mind. I'm having an Am I the arch enemy moment because in my playgroup, they don't have good mechanics, i.e. drawing a card before untapping, not declaring phases, checking for upkeep triggers, and especially grievous for me, not declaring when they're done with their first main phase and just move to attack with a declared attacker. I've played in EDH and Commander tournaments. Play Elsewhere respects all these rules and is very crisp. As a player that holds back responses, I don't think it's fair to foreshadow or forecast or foretell my hand or ability to respond at all because it puts me at a disadvantage or other players for that matter. How should I approach this with my social group? I've done this a couple times already and they say, that's just how we play. Lot to unpack there.
I think this kind of comes down to kind of the old saying, if you run into an asshole in the morning, you ran into an asshole. If you run into assholes all day, you're the asshole. Where I think this group is just kind of one of your more beer and pretzels. We're using Commander as just a way to hang out very, very casually. They're not taking anything super seriously, and he's taking it at almost like a tournament level capacity. Where is it correct? No, but if 3 out of the 4 people are having fun and they're just being very relaxed with it, I have a hard time criticizing it. At that point, maybe I'm doing a more sorcery speed combat oriented deck where like I'm not doing a lot of stuff on their turns, because if they're not wanting to play like a super serious tournament style following magic rules to a T type of thing, they're not going to be very happy with their experience if I'm doing that, if I'm forcing that on them, and I'm not going to be very happy trying to pull teeth to get them to do that.
I'm going to err on the fence of that he is in the right here, because here's the thing. On a recent escapade at my local game shop, I actually had this issue where people were just constantly perpetuating through things. They just get into the rhythm of doing stuff. It's really bothersome to have to be like, hey, hold up. You're sitting here saying it has 20 damage. I said stop before you even cast that first spell. Or like, okay, go to combat, Titanic Growth, cast this, do that. Please take 21 die. Like, hold up, whoa. I had answers long before you did this. You need to go through your steps and phases. I didn't want you to go to combat. I have removal. Why are you skipping my chance to respond?
Truthfully, this is actually just going back to our Halloween episode when you provided the would you rather, and it was the over-explainer versus the under-explainer. And this is just a group of under-explainers that, my God, please, I am trying to play the game at least at a more casual level. Please let me know that you're going to combat. Please tell me that you're going to untap before you draw. Please just do the basics of the game. I'm kind of going in between both of you at this one. I think that him trying to hold them to the highest standards isn't right. But at least them coming and doing the correct things for the game is not also unheard of. Because they're violating the one mantra that you teach to new players. Untap, upkeep, draw a card. They're just drawing that card regardless.
We have different layers of involvement in this game, and this seems like to be hyper casual. It sounds like it's a friend group meeting outside of a local game store. That's just kind of the vibe I'm getting from comment. Very well could be a different scenario that I'm just not getting the full context on. But I just feel that, for example, I was at around Christmas, my family was in town, and we went to a coffee shop to go get some drinks, have some snacks, sit down, relax, open presents, because my family was visiting town and we didn't really have a place to stay because I'm kind of building a house right now, so I'm in between places at the moment. There was a dad, a mom, and a kid, and they each of them had like one random precon they had sleeved up, and they were just playing Commander in the coffee shop together. Very casual, not going through the phases, just having fun, slinging some spells. There's levels to this, and a lot of people that we engage with on a daily basis, especially people that are listening to this podcast, are taking this game a bit more seriously because care more about it. Like we're nerds, we like to learn things. There are other people that just maybe got into it because, like, well, I like Fallout. This is a card game that lets me play with my Fallout characters, and that's all they want to do. I think in most pods, you're not the arch enemy, and that one you might be a little bit, where it might make sense to like, all right, we're playing this game too differently. Let's move on.
I would agree if the way this person talks, this is a social group. This is a group that has some level of interaction on the regular basis. This is not a guy who's walked up on some people he hasn't played or talked to consistently and then suddenly deciding like, hey, I don't want to appreciate, like, this is someone or a group of people, sorry, who he is supposed to be interacting with regularly enough that this is an issue going forward. It's not just a kid and their family he runs into at the shop and maybe has seen twice. This is, from the wording tells me, this is a regular group that he or she is going to see every other week, maybe every week, either at a shop or at a local friend's, wherever they're meeting. I don't think the consistency justifies not following the rules.
And that's at least where my opinion was, where both sides seem to be having a different level, because it's understandable. And I think the best case scenario for both of them is that this person just needs to seek a different play group, because obviously this friend group is not playing at the level that they want to be playing at. And especially because given all of their responses, they're likely a blue player.
Yeah. My other thing is,
you're absolutely a blue player or just playing on the stack all the time.
The other thing that I will not give to this player's credit, but I will say is maybe a factor to their frustrations, is we live in a day and age where Magic has a lot of just static triggers. As cards that say at every upkeep or during player's phase do X or blah, like etc. etc. And if you have to sit there and remind people, but there are mandatory triggers, like if I have, what's the card? There's a green treefolk that makes sapperlings on every player's upkeep.
Verdant
not
Force.
A May.
I want to say it's Verdant Force.
Verdant Force. It's a treefolk. It's a 7-drop. It's a 7/7. It says at each player's upkeep, make a sapling. That is not a May. I am not allowed to ignore that trigger, forget that trigger. If I sit here and you skip through the things, I'm like, hold up, stop. I have to do this first. That's the ground I'm suspecting this guy is on.
That group, in the casual sense, they're probably willing to run it back. Like, okay, go get your 2, 3 sapling tokens that you forgot about. We are kind of in this interesting age now that Arena's been around long enough that we're getting some players that are coming from just Arena over to paper, where all their triggers were taken care of for them. So now you have to mentally like, okay, each upkeep, Coma makes another coil. I have to be aware of this. Or for X Arena, I get that extra card. I'm also losing that life.
I will point to one of the interesting sentences of this Am I the Archenemy? I don't think it's fair to foreshadow or forecast or foretell my hand or ability to respond at all because it puts me at a disadvantage for other players for that matter. That points to me that their possible retort would be just tell me if you need me to stop before it happens, which is not necessarily what you want to do, which is why I agree with that sentiment, is because if you always say stop before your combat, I have something, well, now that immediately can change a game plan before even doing that.
I think at some points you have to be, it's not rude, but it's kind of rude. If you're playing a game with somebody like, okay, I'm going to cast this spell, I'm going to send these 2 attackers to you. Okay, before you go to combat and kind of roll it back a little bit, make sure that they're aware. Like if someone's not saying like, okay, I'm going to combat. Okay, before you go to combat, to make sure you can get the trigger in that you want, it may just he doesn't want to come off as confrontational. And that is a very real issue with Commander is it's 4 players. You don't want to piss anybody off. You have people coming from various walks of life. That means we have a lot of people in this that are anti-confrontational or socially awkward. That's part of it. So it may just be that he doesn't want to kind of butt in. And this might be just a growing frustration. But I think just for everyone involved, either he needs to scale it back and play something a bit less blue just to not have to worry about that. Or he needs to find a group that's kind of more on his level.
Even if they play less blue, that doesn't negate having any kind of response or actions that you may take during other players' turns.
There are decks and strategies that are more just sorcery speed than others.
There are a lot of decks out there that cannot win at sorcery speed. And I say that in the air of joining a pod of players. If everything you do is at sorcery speed and your gaming with them progresses as it should, people are going to stop doing sorcery speed things and you're just going to fall behind most of the time.
It can be a kind of a level up moment. And this is kind of transitioning a little bit into our rookie mistakes. Whenever a new player kind of learns the power of the stack and timing and knowing like, oh, I should wait until something attacks me or my opponent's end step to use the swords to plowshares in the event that something worse comes out than what I was going to target anyways.
As well as if you learn the phases yourself, you can abuse something like reconnaissance.
Absolutely. Obviously, it is the one of the downsides of this game is the more knowledge you have, it drastically increases your win rate, where it's a little bit less of an even playing field, where it's hard to have newer players join in with veterans and have much of a chance just because this game is so complex. Player who's been playing for 20 years is going to be able to kind of dual circles around a pot of 3 new players. And there's not a whole lot you can do against it.
A fighter pilot operating as a mechanic on a plane is scarier than a mechanic who can fix a car. The guy who fixes the plane fixes the thing that drops all of its ordnance. The other one's just a vehicle for transportation.
All right.
Fair enough.
Shall we hop into our list?
What about our final verdicts on if they're the arch enemy?
Final verdict for me is I think he's a little bit of the arch enemy, but I don't think it's anything egregious. I think as soon as he finds a new play group or they eventually level up to kind of where he's at, they'll be fine. As long as he's being nice about it. If you're coming in rude, don't be rude.
I share that consensus.
I'm kind of on the both are doing it, but it's not super egregious.
The end of the day, people play this game in different ways, and it looks like they're just probably just doing pre-con battle stuff and let them have fun. Moving on to our list, we have a total of 9, so we each put 3 on this list. And these are things that we've learned or we've seen kind of these rookie mistakes as we've been going through. We're going to be a little bit of a rotation, so I will read off my first one, then Joe, then Jacoby, then back to the top of the order. We're just going to kind of go round and round versus kind of a snake draft like we do with our fantasy drafts. I'll go ahead and start with mine. First rookie mistake I see with a lot of new players is listening to one person instead of the entire table. A lot of times what happens with new players, especially it's a oh, I've got this beast within in my hand. I got this piece removal. That can be a terrifying situation for a new player because everyone's going to have an opinion on where that should go. And you don't really have the ability to really have a full assessment of what's going on at the table. When you listen to everybody, all three people, they might say, okay, you should definitely target the heuristic study. The heuristic player might say, no, I think that person's commander is more of a threat to you. If you only listen to one person, you're going to get a very flawed opinion of what might be the threat at the table. It can get to the point that the other two players might kill you because they're going to see you as more of an ally to that third player versus actually another player in the game. And they might have to take you out as more of a threat because you're kind of an extension of that player. It's teaming up at that point. You really need to listen to everyone's opinions.
And specifically, the scenarios in which I've seen this is the new player is related to in some way to the player that they're listening to at the table, whether that be a significant other, their friend that was brought in, their family member that brought them into the game, because they have such a high regard for them in the first place and may not have that game sense to maybe not take them at face value.
And most rookie players that are coming into local game stores or wherever you might be, they're going to be attached to somebody. It's rare that somebody, like incredibly rare, that someone goes to a local game store, picks up a precon and just kind of jumps into it. It happens, but most of the time it's, yeah, oh, like my coworker said this magic thing would be fun. I'm going to go give it a try. Or like my boyfriend really likes this game. I wanted to learn more about it to kind of connect with them, whatever it might be. That is an excellent point, Joe.
And also, something to keep in mind on that same context is that there are going to be times where you're going to point out an obvious threat that people don't understand because they might not be quite at your level. And then you understand that, hey, if you don't kill this piece, other half is very potentially out there and it's going to make this loop and we're going to have this stuff. Not totally disregarding someone's knowledge just because they might not be in the worst spot. Like if the person in second place says, okay, here are the threats. This one, and he points at a card, is the really scary one. Don't take it at face value, but don't disregard it because you just either look at the player and go, meh, or you just don't understand the thought as they're trying to explain it to you.
So a good way to test if somebody you're talking to is actually reliable is asking the table what they think the threat is. And if like two people are agreeing on one thing and that person, and you ask them like, is this a problem card like a heuristic study? They just straight up try to like gaslight you a little bit and say like, oh, that's not a problem at all. But two players are like, yes, that is a problem. They're not a reliable source for your information moving forward. If they're like, yeah, it's a problem, but this is a bigger problem, or they at least address the accusation, then you have a bit more of reliable. And obviously they're going to politic. Like they don't want the heuristic study to get blown up. But if they just straight up lie to you and say like, it's not a problem, then you have a bit more of an issue at your hands.
Interestingly enough, I had a scenario like this, but it was the inverse where the table should have listened to me because they listened to the person I was trying to deal with as the threat by board wiping. But unfortunately, the way that I was trying to board wipe was the angel that you vote. And if you vote for grace, everybody's creatures come back. And if you vote for condemnation, every creature except for the angel goes away. This person had just board wiped everybody. And I was trying to get rid of their board because they were able to keep it because they were running Bernard, the gingerbread man. The other people listened to the person that I was trying to deal with saying, hey, don't you just want to get your stuff back? Without any regard to the stuff that they had not being able to deal with their board. And when it got back to their turn with their board still intact, they in fact went off crazily. And nobody could do anything because nobody's boards had stuff to deal with it.
It's almost like commander players are greedy as hell.
I literally told the player before me, don't play anything. I'm trying to destroy that board. Please. Nope.
But I want my solemn simulacrum back.
This man's literally looked you in your face and be like, but just think, guys, he could give you your things back. I know it's all toy blocks and garbage, but he could give them back to you.
Definitely going to kill you and take your lunch money with my stuff, but hey, you'll have your things in the tomb.
Yeah, because there was a dove that cares about populating in tokens to get bigger.
Yeah, was it nesting dove?
Yeah, nesting dove. There was the splicer that gave all the golems flying.
Hey, wing splicer,
Nesting
baby.
Delta.
There was so much on that board that it needed to just go away. But there were just like, but my vanilla creatures, though.
I think we're ready to move on to number 2 here. Joe.
Truthfully, this can be springboarded off of the last example, which is not asking enough questions.
What do
That
you mean by that?
that is universal to anything, really. And thank you for asking a question. It'll expound on the point that maybe you will garner more information on actions that are being taken at the table, where you will get more information than you previously had to deal with the situation at hand. There are many times in which people don't ask those questions, whether they feel like their question is dumb, whether they don't want to feel stupid if they ask a question, whether it is they think that they know better. Sometimes asking questions will give you clarity that you did not previously have, even if you think that you may understand it all. Sometimes just asking the question to get that clarity, worlds beyond what you might think.
It's always helpful for reading the card explains the card is technically a question, not a statement. You cannot read the card if you do not ask to receive the card and understand the card. If you go, I have Sisse, and I sit and read the card, I have to ask you to hand me the card so I can read the dang thing, right?
Reading the card explains the card drives me a little bit nuts because 1, we have a lot of Texas cards and stuff that is barely legible anymore, and 2, erratas happen. But also, reading the card explains the card doesn't necessarily explain the context. Like, there's a lot of combos out there where something might seem really weird, and like asking the table, like, okay, why do I care about this Samwise being on the field, making the food tokens? Or why do I care about Aminatu with this Nico Bolas, or whatever the combination might be, or some other very strange combination of cards that you may not understand the synergies at face value. Usually, the stranger the card is, the more I'm worried about it. Because people don't put random nonsense in the deck most of the time for like no particular reason.
I had that example just this past week when I was on Benji's stream, because he's branching out to just having actual gameplay videos and using the wheels to decide what level of gameplay people are going to be doing on that stream, rather than trying to bring in decks that they may have brewed on previous Brewing with Benji streams. And specifically, I had to explain how the Zealous Conscript combo worked with my Girrid deck, because someone wasn't grokking how that worked. They didn't understand that I make a balloon, I untap Girrid, I tap Girrid to make another balloon, because I made Zealous Conscript balloon with the Jolly Balloon Man. Get ballooned on. Here, have my 99,000 red balloons.
And a contradiction to we now have all these cards in different languages and we have all these things in different arts, and there's full arts and so on and so forth. We also live in the day and age where Scryfall is an app on your phone. If you cannot physically read that version of the card, there is an easy, accessible way to find access to that card. Someone's textless version does not justify you being incapable of reading it. If you can simply go, okay, the name is in Phyrexian, you need to tell me what this is, and then you can look it up on your phone in like 30 seconds. I've had to do that recently. No one remembers what Cryptic Command does, and this guy had a textless one, and I went, what is this card again? Cryptic Command. Went on Scryfall. It says this. This is the Oracle text.
Man, and you name all of that off the top of your head without the Scryfall? Because I'm pretty sure you can like draw 2 cards, you can counter a spell, I think you can bounce something, and what's that last one? Tap something down? Is it tapping something down? Jacoby's looking it up. Drum roll, please.
Cryptic Command states exactly. Choose 2. Counter target spell. Return target permanent to its owner's hand. Tap all creatures your opponents control or draw a card.
So I was close with tapping, but it is all creatures, not just a single thing.
Bouncing a perm. Did you say creature or permanent?
I said
Target
bouncing
permanent.
a thing.
The point being is we live in day and age where when we were a little younger and Magic was a little younger, we didn't have a whole lot of these things out there to just at a whim go, I want to know what this card does. We do now. There are on my phone like 6 different apps that all do the same thing that Scryfall does. And Scryfall is super reliable in this day and age.
It does slow
Everyone,
down the game a bit, though.
sure, but at that point, don't play Texas cards. You don't know what they do.
If an opponent's playing some, you don't really have as much of a choice in that matter. Like a rule 0, no Texas cards would be kind of a strange request.
Sure, but also if we're going to make an argument that we have to ask the questions to understand that this is on that baseline. You have to ask the questions to understand. If they have Texas stuff, their responsibility or your responsibility to take the moment to either look it up or find it out. Part of that whole asking, you need to ask questions.
Asking questions is never a bad thing, just to get the clarification that you need. And truthfully,
you can accidentally read cards. Like you can read it as tap target creature instead of tap target creature and opponent controls or something. This kind of stuff happens all the time. Our brains are designed to shortcut and be as efficient as possible. Give everyone a little bit of grace if they misunderstand something the first time they see it or whatever it might be. I've brewed X and then reread the commander and been like, oh, it doesn't work the way I thought I did. There goes an hour of my life or whatever it might be. And that's always rough.
yeah, because
Bro,
the wordings always.
I recently had a wording altercation with someone because they swore up and down one of the words was each, and I'm literally holding the card that they put on the field and I read it aloud to them and they are like, it sure doesn't say each now, does it? My guy, read, it's okay. Ask questions.
Some of the wordings are actually very ambiguous for what it is actually targeting too. And that's where you really need to ask the questions, because there are some that say, hey, it's dealing it with this creature and this creature, but you only do it to this creature if this creature is some specific thing and not the ability affecting the creature that it is just using as a reference. Sometimes the wordings can get real complicated.
And kind of on this as well, and we probably should get on to number 3, but like even the amount of generic keywords we have that are used like once and then they upgrade them later on, where it's harder to keep track of everything in shortcut. And like there's weird situations too, like protection from green can knock somebody's enchantment off their creature and stuff like that. It's not as specifically specified on the card. So kind of learning and understanding and knowing how everything works, it takes time. It's not as simple as 1, 2, 3, start learning the game, learning how to tap it, untap, and then I'm going to jump down your throat if you don't know everything there is.
And as a final point to this, before moving on to Jacoby, make sure that if you are in a tournament setting, these questions are being levied at a judge. Never just take your opponent's word for it. Always get the final say from a judge. Ask those questions to a judge. That's what they're there for.
Jacoby, number 3.
Number 3 is assuming only the best version of a card is quote unquote the card that needs to be in your deck. There's a lot of instances where people will see cards, they go, it goes in every deck forever, and I will never have a deck that doesn't have it. A big example of this is there are a lot of people who say, I do not have a blue deck that does not have Rhystic Study in it. They go, every deck that's blue in my library, it has Rhystic Study, it's an auto-include, I will never not put it in a deck. There are going to be instances, there are going to be play groups and games where you could have substituted that with a different style of card draw effect that doesn't get either A, the level of hate, or B, the level of just slowing down the game to a slog you don't want to deal with. Sometimes you deal in explosive games where a Mystic Remora, which comes down sooner but goes away, could have been a better slot for this Rhystic Study you put in, because your play group is very early game motivated, and either you slow them just enough to do your stuff, or you get all the cards you needed and then you got what you needed for a cheaper cost mana wise, or vice versa. You could, instead of needing this taxable draw engine, you could have a reactive draw engine that says, when players do X, just draw your card. Something that doesn't give people the opportunity to stop you by paying mana. Because there are players that worry about infinite mana. I don't want Rhystic Study because I know that they'll always pay for it, and then when they go off, the Rhystic Study has done nothing, when they could have had something that says, you took these 2 actions, draw my card. You took these 2 other actions, draw my other card, etc., etc.
Or it's a simple concentrate or harbonize sometimes. Just a simple 4 mana, draw your 3 can definitely have some benefits. I mean, there's also some synergies that you might miss out on. But I think a lot of times you'll get somebody who will have a precon and they look up like, oh, for example, like maybe they pick up like the fairies precon. Blue, black, it's got some flyers in there, it's doing some tricky stuff. I'm gonna
Yeah.
go get some staples for it. Here's Ristic Study. Now opponents might think you're stronger than you are, or you might get a lot more attacks coming your way that you're not suited or prepared to handle because they see a card like that.
In the same strain, they could have gone to how I did when I first started deck building, EDH Rec, where they will just say, hey, these are cards that are in a majority of people's decks, which may not lean to the strategy that you want to be in. EDH Rec is a great site. But if you have a specific strategy and you're not tuned in on that for EDH Rec, and you're not using Scryfall to see other effects that you may want in that deck, you may end up with a Ristic Study in something like how I would like to build Cody, no permanent spells.
Another thought about it is deciding when you draw the line for certain effects. If you have Mr. Cremorta, you also have Ristic Study, and you have a third or fourth or fifth enchantment, when you need to also understand that in finding those extra card draw things, you don't need Phyrexian Arena if you already have these other things. It's not the card to make the deck fix.
It always depends. Like whenever I'm building a deck, I want to have some good draw value engines. And sometimes it's something simple as a Beast Whisper if I've got a lot of creatures in the deck that I'm going to be casting. And then I want to have some immediate type of card draw effects, like just maybe a simple harmonized draw 3 cards and just get something in my hand right away that I may or may not be able to cast, but I can only start thinking about. Versus I don't know how many cards this Ristic Study is actually going to net me. Don't get me wrong, Ristic Study, very, very good card. But it's not a perfect card for every deck because not every deck is able to handle Ristic Study hate. If I have a Ristic Study on the field, in my mind, I'm saying whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may draw a card unless they pay 1. Also, all creatures are going to attack you. That's how I'm seeing this card in my head. And I'm knowing if I'm playing this card, I'm going to be expecting some more hostility from the table because of it, because they're going to get bugged by me asking all the time.
Or you could also just switch out Ristic Study for something that is also a blue enchantment, 2 and blue, and one of my favorite to put into any teamer deck, Set a Sanctuary, where you will just guarantee draw 3 cards on your turn as long as you have a red and green permanent on your field. Because it will draw you 3 cards and you discard 1, but you have 3 new resources versus the one that may have been a dead card in your hand.
It's very possible, and green does have the ability to bring things back from the graveyard too. So
sometimes you find cards that may even affect your strategy even better than the quote-unquote staples.
Moving on here to number 4. My fourth one is kind of a little bit on the other side of it, so this is obviously a nice balancing act. It is leaning on a theme too hard. This happens a lot of times when a person wants to make their entire deck around one particular theme. We see this a lot with blink effects. I'm going to have all my removal be blink cards or like cards with ETBs so I can use this for removal. And then one player plays a Toper Orb and now I can't do anything. So it can absolutely cause issues. So it's always good to know what might cause my deck to have an issue. So I have at least a couple of cards in the deck that can deal with it. For example, I have a Brago King Eternal deck. It's one of my favorite decks. I run Swords of Plowshares and Parting Gust is a new addition to the deck and things like that. Some instant and sorcery speed removal in addition to some of the other creature based, because I need a way that if my opponent has an Elish Nord in play that shuts down enter the battlefield effects, that I can get rid of it. So I'm not just dead in the water as soon as that comes down.
I feel like this is a shot at me.
It's not necessarily to show you. I actually brought it up because it was ironically Rachel Weeks was talking about her Blink deck wanting all of removal to be in Blink theme. And it's sometimes if you lean too hard on a theme, if somebody has the ability to stop or prevent that theme, that can cause you a lot of problems.
I mean, if it happens, it happens.
I was going to say, sometimes you just accept that your deck is going to do this, and if they counter this, sorry, not sorry. If you fight Rest in Peace as a graveyard deck, and your deck mostly mills itself, sorry, not sorry, you're probably not finding the removal half the time, or the Rest in Peace, and you just get to take that L. That's part of the fun of the game.
That being said, as much as I still love leaning on a theme too hard because that's just how I deck build, and it is still fun to see the games play out that way. I can also say that that is for a very, very experienced player, because if you aren't able to build those decks to roll with the punches at that point, you probably do want to just ease it back a bit and get some pieces that can deal with the people that are hosing you, such as with a Rest in Peace or Torpor Orb.
Even if your playgroup isn't very stacks oriented, every once in a while, someone's going to have an Elish Norn Grand Cenobite in their token deck that could really hose you if you have a lot of low toughness creatures and things like that. You have to be aware of what your deck's bad at and just have a response in your deck somewhere that if something that's really bad for you sticks, at least have something in your deck that you could possibly find to get yourself back into it versus just kind of being dead in the water.
And truthfully, I think this leads into my next rookie mistake, which is thinking your deck is fine on its first run. You just built this deck. You did all of the research. You think that every single card in there is going to make it run and work as if it is the most tuned deck you have. And then you sit down at a game and find out, wow, this card that I really thought was a good addition at first, turns out it did not do the synergy or the thing that you wanted it to do at all. You will go through so many different iterations of a deck because you will find that there are cards that on their face look really good in that strategy. And then you find out that sometimes they are just a full ass dead card and weren't helping your strategy in the least.
And sometimes with this, like it can even be even beyond the first draft. Sometimes after a second or third draft, going back through your list and looking to see if there was some synergies that may not need to be there anymore. Semi recently, I was upgrading my Captain Sisay deck, which is more of a Staxy style of deck, and it used to have Seedborn Muse in it. But later down the line, I took it out because I really wasn't doing anything at flash speed as much where I needed to untap everything outside of just getting a couple extra targets, and it was a bit more of a win more. So it ended up getting cut. But I was still running Thran Temporal Gateway, which is a 4-mana legendary artifact that says for tapping for 4 mana, you may put a historic permanent from your hand onto the battlefield. It was a way to kind of get around counters. And with Seedborn, it was great because I could just tutor something up and put it right into play. And the next turn, do the same thing over and over again. But without Seedborn, it was significantly worse in the deck. So I took it out for something a bit more on theme with what I was trying to do.
And also, never be ashamed to look at your deck. You run it, you're like, oh, these pieces were awesome. And then you do that first iteration and go, wow, this banger card sucked.
That was a bad feeling whenever, in theory and in practice, do not line up.
It's good to accept that it just happens, but have some enthusiasm. Be like, yeah, this card's cool. Sucked here, but it was cool.
That happened with me and the Garrett deck because its first run had Terror of the Peaks, because the whole point was I'm just going to keep making a whole bunch of creatures and Terror of the Peaks will kill the table for 5 mana, which is not fast enough if you're trying to do those kind of combo wins at a higher power level.
Did not, in fact, do the thing, yes.
Well, and sometimes, too, depending on your objectives for your deck, sometimes you might be too successful at building a deck, and it may come in a lot stronger than you're intended. Where instead of just being like, I want to have something kind of around pre-con level, it's, oh, this is kind of keeping up with the high power casual tables right now. I need to kind of scale this back, whether it's upping the curve, running stuff a bit more greedy, whatever it might be. Or maybe you just need to scrap the theme. It just kind of depends on what happens. You can have it be inefficient, but you can also make it too strong for what it is you're trying to do.
Which we'll run into a different point later on, but that's not what is currently happening.
And just don't forget that it's okay to like bad cards. Just because the card like you thought it was a banger, you put it in, it turned out to be bad, you can still love that card.
I love so many bad cards, especially Maze's End. Try to win with
Me
that
too.
in so many decks.
And that will lead to the next point, which is underestimating a card based off of your first sighting of it. I have had so many instances where people see cards and there will be a lot of people that are like, this card's just bad. It doesn't belong anywhere. Why would you put it in any deck? And then I proceed to kill them with that card. For first instance this happened, I had someone look at me and they looked at a Tarka's Command and said, how and why would you put that in a commander deck? Atarka's Command, an interesting rule card. Let me look up all of its modes for you. Atarka's Command, for a red and a green, choose 2. Your opponents can't gain life this turn. It deals 3 damage to each opponent. You may put a land onto the battlefield, or your creatures get 1/1 and reach. Face value, it does okay things. You can either stop them from gaining life and deal some damage, deal a little damage, a slight bit of okay ramp. Your creatures get a little taller, whatever. A lot of people looked at this card in my deck and went, why on goodness green earth would you ever run this? And they just underestimated the snot out of this card, to which I proceeded to make 30 of them. And then they died to 3 damage each opponent. The argument I got against it was just run Bolt Wave. It's cheaper, blah, blah, blah. A whole bunch of bad justification that I shouldn't run a card I like because they didn't understand the potential for what I was doing. Their preconception of thinking a card is just weird because it's the first time they've seen it in a scenario doesn't have to be your, yeah, I don't get it, therefore it's bad.
Which is weird because they're saying how they would build a deck and not necessarily looking at what that card might actually be doing. They're just jumping to the end conclusion that it shouldn't be in your deck regardless without thinking through the steps of why you may have put that into your deck. I know I'm sometimes guilty of not knowing why a card should be in my deck. It's in fact why I had that whole thing of thinking my deck is fine on the first run is kind of a rookie mistake because it's a mistake I constantly do.
It can be kind of a weird spot in between. I think the most famous version of this, especially because at the rate that these cards are coming out, it can be really hard to keep track of everything because you only really can get like one quick little glance on a card before moving on because by the time a set releases, the next one's spoiling. That's just kind of the world we live in now. And I think the most iconic miss on an assessment of a card was with Command Zone. Jimmy and Josh said that Paradox Engine was just going to be kind of a very basic middle of the line card, and it ended up being banned within a couple of years because of how powerful that card is. The running joke was always, is it Paradox Engine good? Because they didn't think it was going to be a very good card to begin with and ended up being absolutely busted. Sometimes you just have to see stuff in action. And I've had some cards that I put in a deck just because like I had it lying around and then I'm like, holy cow, like this thing slaps. Like this is incredible. And I've had other cards that I thought were incredible. And then you give them a try and they're like, this is actually getting too much attention, or I don't think it's as good as I thought it was. It's a little too situational. You have to just play a lot of Commander to figure out what a card's going to be. And sometimes going and doing your limited drafts and stuff just to get a chance to try some stuff out in a semi-competitive environment is also a good way to kind of learn some of these cards.
Especially because a lot of the cards in CDH, a lot of them on their face can sometimes not seem as good. Orcish Lumberjacks, for instance, is like the one that I would go to. Because people would look at that and it's like, why would I want to sacrifice a land to get just 3 mana? That seems really risky. And they are not immediately thinking that, oh, hey, you could sacrifice that land so that you can win that turn.
Or how people, when the initiative came out, were like, this isn't going to really damage any formats. And then it obliterated a Pauper.
Which
and
in
Legacy.
Commander, it's really underwhelming. And Pauper got hit really hard. Legacy got hit really hard. I think Vintage might have got a little bit too. Like anywhere that it was legal was getting hit. And it was insane. Like I think a world championship was won because of just precon bulk rare stuff that they put in just to slam down the initiative and hold it over turns.
It's why they had to ban White Plume Adventurer in Legacy, because it was not designed as a 1v1 mechanic. It was designed as a 4-person mechanic where even if one person can't wrestle it away, somebody else might.
One of the strongest Pauper decks in the format for the longest time was Mono Black Gardens, where it was just a matter of getting an adventure on the field, killing everything that moved, and then eventually getting to the final room, getting another creature, and just keep running. It has since been kind of mitigated out a little bit because we have a lot faster, more efficient things you can do at the time until some potential bans drop in the future, but still is an incredible mechanic for that 1v1 environment. I don't think R&D was really considering that when they were putting it together.
They're also very pressed because, truthfully, people who tell them, hey, do this, do this now kind of fall into your next point, Levi.
My next point here is being too impatient. A lot of times, this is more as far as when you're playing, a lot of times with Commander, you have it where it's, oh, I could win this turn, or I can try to win this turn, but you may not consider, okay, this person has mana untapped. This person didn't play anything on this turn. He's got 7 mana floating, or whatever it might be. Where the odds of you winning 2 turns from now increases your odds substantially if you just eliminate one player and you hold back. A lot of times with Commander, we want to just kind of push everything to the middle and play out all of our creatures, and then a board wipe happens and we are done for the game. So just having that patience to understand like another turn will come around, kind of knowing when to just kind of hold things back and just let things play out. It's kind of a very white way to play the game versus, red might be a little bit more sporadic. But I think a lot of times just knowing when to hold back and when to just, let me just take out one player and then pass the turn and then circle around to it again versus just trying to commit where it may backfire on you and you lose the opportunity to win at all.
And this particular piece of advice is the most useful when you're doing mid-range, which that's what a lot of Commander is mid-range, because it is finding your window and making sure that that window is in fact the window you need to go for.
Yeah, absolutely. It's okay to have a forward progressing plan where you give a little bit of chance to have something happen, but going completely grapes for cashews against somebody and be like, either you deal with it or you don't, I got it next turn, not always a great idea.
And especially if you announce it like that, Jesus.
Well, I mean, just doing it, whether you announce it or not, figure it out. Math for blockers, bad concept. Please count your damage and not hope you can kill them. No, you can kill them.
Granted, an exception to this rule is sometimes you have just enough resources to go for a win right there. Like you do not have the ability to win at a later turn. And you just have to say, all right, my only option here is to full commit and see what happens. Sometimes you get got and it doesn't work out in your favor. But if you're in a winning position and you can hold that winning position, sometimes it's a better idea to play a little bit safer to make sure you can maintain it versus overextending yourself and getting bit. Perfect example is going to attacks and not casting anything until your main phase 2 in case a Cyclonic Rift or something's on the board. Then you can be the first to rebuild versus try to fully extend, adding more power to the board and swinging it. Being a little bit more cautious with your turns as you go in a smart way.
Don't be like me. I'm gung-ho, straightforward. Return to Monk.
Full commit. Moving on to number 8, Joe.
So this is harkening back to what you were saying with maybe my deck was a little too strong, because my rookie mistake, my last one, is assuming that your deck is at a certain level. You may have built it with a certain power in mind, but it's falling into the trap that we all fall into when we don't play with enough people, is assuming that this deck is going to be ubiquitous to everyone's idea of a power level. Going back to that game where I had to explain the Zealous Conscripts combo, it came up that the pod was misinterpreting high power when I brought that deck to the pod because I won on turn 5. That seems like a reasonable high power game to me. The rest of the pod, with how that game felt, didn't feel like it was the high power that they were thinking of. They were thinking that I was playing like a CDH deck, which, while it has those kinds of combos, my deck doesn't run tutors. I just was able to win because my luck of the draw ripped off the Jolly Balloon Man off the top. And I said, well, I have enough mana to just go for it.
And I've talked to Jacoby about this, where I truly believe, and this is not a fully fleshed out thought, but I truly believe that CDH might be one of the worst things that ever happened to Commander, because a lot of people don't understand what CDH actually is and the tournament meta around it. And it's a full-on intention versus just something being very, very strong. And we have high-powered casual for a reason, but it's very rare to have a player that identifies something in high-power casual, because a lot of times decks that would fall in that category, in their little play group around in their nucleus, it's the strongest thing they've seen. And they have no idea how that would compare to a blue farm, because on paper, I can just kill this thing with my removal spell that I might hypothetically have in my hand, versus understanding like, oh, well, if it's running Solemn Simulacrum, it's probably not in a CDH meta, just kind of as it stands.
There's also there's too much of the concept where someone sees something they saw once in a CDH tournament and they assume whatever brand they are looking at is the brand that goes to the tournaments. We have this happen quite often in my local pods. Levi's been at a lot of these tables where it's happened where I pull out my Wizards deck and they see the commanders, Krark and Thrasios, and go, oh, we're playing CDH now. It doesn't skip a beat in their mind. They're like, oh, we're in CDH now. The gloves are off. It's time to get the most competitive and not understand it. It's like not even close to that deck. That deck's a whole different archetype.
And just kind of piggyback off that is, technically speaking, the NASCAR model for Team Toyota is a Toyota Camry. There is a big difference between the Toyota Camrys you see on I-77 and the Toyota Camrys that they have on a NASCAR track. They've been souped up into oblivion. Having a car like that, because the friends at NASCAR Technical Institute that are repairing cars have a better understanding of how your engine works. It is drastically different than what is actually in the competitive scene. So I think having understanding, like, just because like someone's running Tivit doesn't mean it's the super hyped up version of Tivit.
Keeping in mind that if you see components of a CDH combo, they are not inherently going to do the CDH combo right then and there. There are many people who see Demonic Consultation and the only thought they have is, oh God, they're going for Thoracle or something. I have watched people meme on themselves by going, I would really like a ramp spell. Demonic Consultation, Nature's Lore, and then exile the lore and get really sad. It's been hilarious. But the moment they went to cast the spell, the other member of the pod was just like, I guess we lose, guys. And he started scooping up all of his cards.
That's putting the cart before the horse. You don't do that until you Thoracle. Or you do what other people do and you use it to go find food chain, because then you'll exile the creatures that you need to be in exile to cast them with the food chain.
Before we got Thoracle in the world, Demonic Consultation used to just kind of be a crappy tutor. Sometimes people use it that way. And that's totally fine. Like finding food chain, definitely fine. But there are decks that maybe they just have it in there as an extra tutor because they want to go find their favorite vampire or whatever it might be.
Or even in CDH, sometimes they just have to use it as a crappy tutor to find a counter spell.
And also, there's been the instance where people are like, oh God, that's a mono black melon deck. Don't play Opt Agent on me, please. What? I don't have that in the deck, dude. We're just going to get to tutor our stuff. Relax.
Bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see how it works out.
It worked? Never, but it's still funny.
You know how petty it would be, though, in a game to have somebody go tutor and you play Oppo Agent and you steal their Oppo Agent, and then they remove the first one and you put out the second Oppo Agent because they think they're safe.
That would be a really funny two-headed giant deck. Just the both of you have an Op Agent just for the spite.
Which kind of also then goes right into Jacoby's last point.
Carrying salt across games. Hear me out. I get it. Joe Blow Schmo, Goofy McGoof over here, decided that wheeling you for the 7th time was funny and you didn't like it. You are allowed to dislike something and then move on in the next game to do something fun instead of being like, I'm only going to play Swords to Plowshares to kill all your creatures and stab you because I don't like you anymore.
Jacoby, why would you call me out like this so much?
I know what I'm about.
Rude.
I think there can be a difference between forgiving and forgetting with a lot of these. Carrying the salt over in a game for sure. If somebody like backs out on a deal and goes against their word, you probably should remember that the next time you're in a game and you need to team up with somebody and maybe not choose them. Because I think if somebody is doing stuff that you don't necessarily agree with, and one, you want to continue to play with them, because sometimes you don't, that you need to kind of identify those red flags and just be aware of that. But I guess don't necessarily carry it over all the time and just hard kill them, because at some point you're going to go into a game and it's a blood feud between two players, and then you're always starting with an enemy. And that's never a spot you want to be with a free-for-all.
You want to keep in mind people's decisions. Don't just blindly trust someone who goes against their word in a previous game. It's different from understanding you cannot trust the basis of their statement, and I'm not going to do it because you have angered me. There's a difference between an intelligent decision based off of knowledge you have and an emotional decision where you're choosing to decline simply because they have upset you.
Salt in gaming is never, well, that is a justified action and why I'm angry at you. Salt is, this is unjustified, and I'm going to pin all of my actions towards that unjustified opinion. Like ripping off the top a card that immediately blew you out and you getting viscerally mad and then carrying that into the next game of, well, you blew me out with that card, so I'm going to tech against you.
The behavior like that, I feel, is not really acceptable. Because if someone gets a lucky draw, they get a lucky draw, whatever. But it's important to distinguish that each particular game is different. There could be ramp that wasn't involved in that last game. There could be card draw that's not involved. It's important to distinguish that each game is its own game.
I feel like it's somewhat common in the Commander community where if I've got a 3/3 creature, everyone's tapped out, to kind of just swing it at the guy who won the last game. Where I think that's kind of a more of a common thing that people do, just to, someone's going to win this next game. I prefer it not to be a repeat, kind of a thing. Where I don't know if that's necessarily salty or just like kind of the common courtesy to give someone else a chance.
I think that at that point, it's expanding it from carrying Salt across games that night to carrying across games week to week.
At that point, you got to walk into the game store with a fresh mindset, I think.
And also, there's a difference between I have this open 3/3 and no one has blocks. Hey, you won. I swing you for 3. And, oh, you have blocks and no one else does, but I'm upset with you, so try to take this 3/3 anyways. Two entirely different vibes. One is, yeah, you won. This is a gameable action. Take 3, please. Versus, I don't like you because you did this. I'm going to make you keep taking this 3. On that principle alone. Two very different realities.
And not including the reality where you swing at the one person that has the creature because you just think that if they do block with it, then I get rid of the value piece.
What's funny to me, though, is a lot of times when you have someone who is kind of a salt retaliation player, you get to a point where they train the table. They only use removal spells on creatures attacking them. If you attack them, they're going to attack you back regardless of blockers or whatever. It makes sense. So what happens is either one, no one's going to attack you until they can kill you to make sure there's no retaliation. Or everyone kind of chips at each other and then they look up and say, well, we're all at like 25 and he's at 40. Now we're going to gang up on that person to take him down. And they may not be in a position to actually do something about that. So you kind of put yourself in a weaker position politically by only doing spite attacks.
And on top of that, you weaken yourself as an individual when you choose to take spiteful game actions as your predetermination when you play with certain people. We have people at our shop we're not necessarily fond of as players, but we are fond of as people. Like nondescript, interesting decks that are cool, but they're piloted kind of in a way that makes them feel ruder. An example is there's a very nice gentleman we know who plays something akin to like Turgrid. We talk about him all the time, Kevin. His decks are extremely tuned and they can be really, really rude. And when you have to play certain ways, he can take it as spite, or it could be the smart game action. And something to his credit is he will never try to keep it from that game into the next game unless it's just unreasonable. Spiteful game actions that just are there because you think he's going to do XYZ versus another deck builder a guy who builds devils. His decks are interesting, they're fun, and he plays in a certain manner that just progresses his board state, and he doesn't know or doesn't realize some interactions exist that could deal with him, and then he has to retroactively feel like he's doing something spiteful when he either is or isn't. There's middle ground, I guess is what I'm getting at, where you have to consider all the factors sometimes.
A devil deck, which commander was it?
It's this fucking devil noble dude called Raphael.
Oh, that was the D&D guy?
Yeah. He does flying. He gives devils, imps, and tieflings +1/+1 and lifelink. At the end step, he'll make the devils that ping you kind of like another friend we have who's got cool stuff like Zagoth. Only his is like end step. If a creature's put in your yard, make a devil.
Gotcha. I always liked Raphael. I don't think I've actually ever seen anyone pilot that deck before, but it's always looked cool.
So this particular person, the way that they would do it is he wanted to keep his end step stuff going on, and he would waste a lot of his interaction on people he thinks would deal with Raphael. but he
Okay.
would blindside himself to like other mass removal, and then it would make him very salty.
Is it more of a assault, just him not making that consideration, or is it directed at the person? Because I feel like in that situation, I would be kind of be mad at myself, like, why didn't I think of that kind of thing?
He would use he would take all his actions to just anytime his devils died, he'd pick that person. He's like, I'm pinging you for 1. I'm pinging you for 1. And he'd do it through the entire game. It would be continuously. You could kill some stuff and deal with players. I'd like to ping you for 12, please.
Yeah, I can see that definitely being more on the level of petty and not in like a fun way.
The deck was interesting because the devils specifically have the text that all of the devils that these kinds of dudes make say the creature deals the damage. So the anthem that says they have lifelink has lifelink tacked to the damage it deals. Cool in concept, but when you pilot it like a schmuck, it doesn't feel cool and fun and interactive anymore. It just feels like you're being a jerk.
A
Yeah.
schmuck.
And a part of that's probably the colors, but that does seem a little bit more vindictive, I would say.
Definitely different than other Rakdos decks because Rakdos, it can just be that kind of hateful, angry color combination.
Lords of Chaos, Lords of Riots, Pain, like anything with horns for those part usually ends up with Rakdos. So
Or Gev that really likes to just damage every opponent to get creature big.
and all those little lizards, but definitely a weird spot to be in. Sorry you had to deal with all that, Jacoby.
It is what it is.
It is, in fact, an important point that you shouldn't be trying to carry salt or carry petty across games. Sometimes when you have a game memory from like games of that same night, it's fine to make a decision of, I'm going to keep you from winning this one, but it is different when you won last week and I don't like that you won last week. I would like to kill you and dedicate all of my resources towards you.
Malicious intent is just not okay.
Let's say you have a player that plays unassuming commander, but it's a very, very strong deck and it kills you a lot. The more you play against this person, the more you hard target them because you have more information about how the deck works, how it's functioning, how strong it can be. Sometimes I don't think it necessarily is like carrying over as far as the terms of spite as much as like knowing what it's capable of.
I don't think it's, to at least correct the point, I don't think it's a specific commander that they're having that issue with. It is just the player. Before we started this podcast and before we became friends, you were that player for me, Levi. You just kept winning games. And that was just like, well, I have to try and beat this guy. He keeps winning games.
If you don't know how to deal with Zur, this can be a very, very tough spot to be in for sure.
I find right now I'm in the situation where I don't really win, but that's because people seem to recognize that I look for an apex of action and then they target me at that apex.
Maybe that's just a point that people are kind of learning your style and maybe you just need to adapt a little bit.
Maybe I make an Xavier Sal deck. No one would see it coming.
But that is
Those who-
all the time we have for this episode here. So that was our 9 rookie mistakes that we see newer commanders play. If you have any topics that you want to see covered on the show, feel free to leave a comment here on YouTube or Spotify. You can also send us an email at thoughtvesselshow@gmail.com. We're more than happy to go through and do so. Listener submitted comments. We have a lot of different ideas coming up for the new year, so we're so excited to get a chance to go over all of that with you. As always, I've been Levi.
I'm a Jacoby.
And I'm a Joe.
This has been Thought Vessel. Y'all have a wonderful week.
Take care.
Let's go.